What's up, fellow bike nerds? It is your lucky day because you just so happen to have stumbled upon the first ever episode of the 99 Spokes Weekly Rewind, where we take a look back at the hottest news stories coming from the cycling industry. From new tech to industry gossip and everywhere in between, you'll find it all here. Now, if you've been a fan of the 99 Spokes channel for a while and you've gotten used to seeing our bike reviews, don't worry, those aren't going anywhere. Still going to do one review a month in addition to these weekly episodes. The next review is going to be the Canyon Spectral on Fly, and you can expect that to come out mid-December. Now, back to the rewind. And of course, this wouldn't be a true industry news roundup without our own ranking board. And thankfully, we have the S.P.O.K.E Hierarchy of Industry Technology Board. Unfortunately though, I've heard that those four letters actually have a slightly negative connotation in other spaces, so I've been told from here on out just to refer to it as the S.P.O.K.E Board. Every new piece of cycling gear or equipment we cover in the Weekly Rewind will earn itself a spot on the S.P.O.K.E Board in one of these 5 categories. Just to make sure we're on the same page before we introduce this week's new products, that would run through a couple examples. Up first, we have dropper seat posts. These little guys have single-handedly changed everything from riding mechanics to bicycle frame geometry. I've been known to say that I probably wouldn't mountain bike without one of them. Obviously, it's going to end up in the highest category, S, which stands for spectacular. Up next, we have electronic drivetrains. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I tend to prefer keeping batteries off my bikes, but there's no denying that these guys have greatly improved shifting performance. What's more, it's also one of the biggest rethinkings of the drivetrain and kind of how we shift bikes in pretty much a century, and that's pretty awesome. Actually, literally, it's pretty awesome. That's our second category here, and that's right where we'll put this guy. Up next, we have tubeless tire inserts. These have been around for the last couple years and do a great job of adding a bit more support to your tire, as well as helping prevent flats. I personally run them front and back on my gravel bike and on the back of my mountain bike, but I'd be lying if I didn't think about taking them out every time I decided to fiddle with my bike. That's a pretty good example for something that's going to end up in our third category down, which is okay. Up next, we have a combination of modern technology with questionable design philosophy, and that is through headset cable routing. As you can see, this does a great job of cleaning up the front of the bike and to some extent also improving aerodynamics. But from a maintenance perspective, it's literally the worst. Need to add a little more grease to your lower headset bearing? Well, have fun disconnecting your derailleur cable, your brake hose, and redoing your bar tape, because that's exactly what you'll have to do. But sadly, seems like us lazy bike mechanics have been outvoted, and headset cable routing is here to stay. But for me personally, I'm gonna put this down here in kinda lame. Our fifth and lowest category that a new product can earn is E for egregious. And our example here is e-bikes. No, I'm just kidding. We love e-bikes. They're great, but so are regular bikes and every other kind of bike. Let's move on. It was actually kind of hard to think of something that earned itself a spot in egregious because, for one, most companies try not to make absolute trash when they bring it to market, and for two, if they do, they usually don't stick around very long. But we did have to give the honor of the first egregious placement to something, and for that, we ended up with the Re-Tire Zip-On, Zip-Off Tire Tread System. While I've never personally ridden them, the concept of your outer tread floating loosely over the casing sounds absolutely terrifying. But there you go, an egregious product, and hopefully we don't see too many more of these popping up on the S.P.O.K.E board from here on out. So with those examples out of the way, I do have a few new products that came out last week that we need to put up here on the S.P.O.K.E board. First of which is a brand new set of pedals coming from a brand new company, Outlier. Outlier dropped 2 designs last week, both offering a super slim, spindle-free body and no inner strut or bracing, which in theory allows your shoe to further conform to the pedal, improving grip. The most unique of those 2 pedals has to be the Pendulum, which is what I have here. As you can see, it only has pins on one side of the pedal, allowing for an asymmetrical design that lowers your center of gravity 17 millimeters over a standard platform pedal. As for how they feel to ride, I've only been able to find one review, and that's from Ryan Kelly, aka the Lone Ranger, and I'll put a link to that somewhere here. In short, he was very impressed, even going as far as to say that these will forever change pedal design. But there are some drawbacks, the biggest of which being the price. 299 Canadian big ones is a lot to spend on a pair of pedals, but Outlier, if you're listening, I'd love to have you change my mind. Another interesting detail on this pedal is the minimum shoe size, presumably to keep your foot from getting stuck in that big old gaping hole in the middle of the pedal. The weight of the pedal is 458 grams per pair, roughly the equivalent, if not a little heavier than other alloy platform pedals. We at 99 Spokes love innovation, and we understand that sometimes there is a quite literal price you have to pay to be on the bleeding edge of technology. But I'm still having trouble wrapping my head around the cost of these pedals, so for now, we're going to leave them right here in OK. That is, until we try them out. Turning our attention now from expensive pedals to expensive bikes, because last week, Scott released the long-awaited update to the Addict RC. The new frame set is nearly 300 grams lighter than its predecessor, putting the weight of the top-end build at a staggering 13 pounds or 5.9 kilograms. To do this, Scott's employed their unique carbon layup process that they've been using on their mountain bikes, which essentially uses a weird balloon inside the tubing to eliminate any excess resin, while also making sure there's adequate material in all the critical places. There have also been some major aero and comfort improvements, as well as a few geo changes and now wider tire clearance, all the way up to 34 millimeters. Now, this wouldn't be a Scott without a bunch of fancy tech, and even their lightweight climbing bike is compatible with their Synchros rear light seat post, integrated bar end tool, and super trick titanium computer mount. While we personally think that discipline-specific bikes like the Addict RC are kind of phasing out in favor of more all-around race bikes, we still think a sub 6 kilogram bike is pretty rad, or should I say pretty awesome, because that's exactly where it's going to end up on our board. Despite the fact that my 9-year-old cousin Luca thinks that this thing should be egregious. I'll let you guys decide at home who's right, him or I. Now, if you want to learn more about this new Scott Addict RC, of course, you can do that on our website, 99spokes.com. Let's go ahead and stick with complete bikes for just a little bit longer and talk about the Atherton S.150. Technically, this bike came out a week before last, but I still wanted to include it here, so sue me. Like the S.170 Enduro bike that came out earlier this year, the S.150 uses Atherton's same trademark lug and tube frame design, but swaps titanium and carbon for aluminum. One of the many perks of this frame design is their ability to quickly and easily make a ton of different frame sizes. There's a whopping 12 available in the S.150, all featuring a mullet wheel setup and 150 millimeters of travel in the rear paired with a 160 millimeter fork. Atherton also claims that their unique frame design is stronger and more fatigue resistant than conventional alloy frames, and it has a lifetime warranty as well as the same Category 5 rating that's usually reserved for full-blown downhill bikes. Frame sets for this guy are going to list for $2,950, and complete bikes start just under $5,000. And don't get me wrong, that is by no means affordable, but I still do think it's a pretty good value for a handmade bike that's backed by one of the most successful families our sport has ever seen. All in all, I love seeing the new innovative technology trickling down to a slightly more reasonable price, and for that reason, I'm going to put it right here at OK, and hope to see more Athertons showing up at my local trailhead in the near future. And by Athertons, I do mean the bikes. I don't think G, Dan, or Rachel would have too much fun riding in Bend, Oregon. We'll go ahead and finish off this week's Spoke board similar to how we started it, and that's with a unique boutique product made from a small startup. This time around, though, we're talking about the Madrone Jab Derailleur. This guy first showed up at the Sea Otter Classic last spring. We are pretty stoked there, and even more excited now that there's finally a production model available. Well, almost available. You can pre-order it now, and you're expected to get it later on next spring. Other than the rad CNC machining, what makes this thing so cool is its combination of adaptability and serviceability. It's compatible with a variety of 9 to 12 speed shifters from both SRAM and Shimano by swapping out the shift cams, which is supposedly a relatively straightforward task. It also features an adapter that makes it compatible with both a traditional derailleur hanger and a T-type style direct mount. Every part on the Jab Derailleur is replaceable in and of itself, and Madrone is committed to stocking these parts long into the future. The unique ratchet clutch and bushing pivots are also adjustable and can be tightened as they wear. Lastly, the Jab also features a super unique flexible derailleur cage that they call the Flex Cage. Original, right? Well, supposedly this design keeps the upper pulley stiff for precise shifting while allowing the lower to wander slightly, smoothing out shifts and damping chain vibration. Like we already learned with the pedals, innovation is seldom cheap, and neither is this guy. It costs $295, which is more expensive than an XTR derailleur. That said, it is the cheapest direct mount option on the market, $100 less than the GX Axis T-Type. In my opinion though, which, let's be real, that's the only one that really matters here, the combination of the sweet CNC body, the essentially infinite adjustability and repairability of this guy earns itself a coveted spot on the spectacular side of our board. And not only that, I went ahead and put my money where my mouth is and pre-ordered this guy, so you can expect to see a review coming next spring. Just don't tell my wife I spent $300 on a derailleur. Our next segment of the weekly rewind is called Hot Goss, which, to be honest, makes me cringe a little bit every time I say it, so we'll see how long that lasts. But regardless, it's where we take an opportunity to sift through the chaff of cycling industry drama. And this week, we're talking politics. More specifically, President-elect Trump and his proposed taxes and tariffs on international goods. Now, let me preface all of this by saying that I have virtually zero financial or political expertise. So please take everything I'm about to say with several grains of salt, but from what I do understand, Trump plans to add an additional 10% to the existing Chinese tariffs, as well as introduce new 25% flat taxes on everything coming in from Canada and Mexico. In terms of the Chinese tax hikes, this will mostly impact lower-end, non-enthusiast bikes. The most notable being the big direct-to-consumer e-bike brands like Rad and Atherton. From an enthusiast perspective, I think the most important and probably the most impactful thing will be on the Canadian brands. To get a little more insight into this, I reached out to a friend of mine and owner of Toronto-based RSD bikes, Alex. While Alex recognizes that these tariff threats are really just that, threats, he still does think that they're worth taking seriously, especially considering the fact that nearly 80% of his customer base comes from folks living in the US. But Alex does see some potential other ways that this tariff situation could end up. The first being a quota system, where essentially Canada has a set number of bikes that they're allowed to import into the US tax-free. Another option is that Trump will let go of these tariffs altogether as a supposed act of goodwill towards Mexico and Canada. But even in the worst case scenario situation, Alex was quick to point out that the bike industry has been through similar situations like this before, and for the most part have been able to navigate that unscathed. And this definitely isn't the first time we've heard big bike pundits start screaming about the sky falling. So we're not going to get too worked up about anything just yet. But if you are a bike nerd, it might be worth keeping your eye on, especially if you're interested in buying a Canadian bike anytime in the near future. You might just want to go ahead and buy that now. The third segment of our show is called Shop Top, where I go behind the scenes and give you a look at the bikes that we at 99 Spokes have chosen to spend our own hard-earned cash on, as well as a sneak peek at some of the review bikes that we have up and coming. Since we already talked a little bit about RSD, I thought it'd be a perfect time to go ahead and show off my own personal RSD middle child. I love riding BMX, and when I first started riding big bikes, and in a lot of ways even to this day, my goal has been to make mountain biking feel more like riding a kid's bike, and no bike does this better than the middle child. I have it built up with 27.5-inch wheels front and back, and the adjustable chainstays slammed all the way down to just 415 millimeters. This bike has proved itself to be capable of everything from bike park laps to XC racing, and as you can see, its current setup is just as diverse, and by diverse, I do mean weird. I'm currently running a 150mm Fox 36 fork, but I'd like to swap that out for a 140mm Pike or Fox 34 in the near future. I've also got some pretty speedy tires on there from doing some cross-country racing on it over the summer, but plan to switch it back over to my typical DHR2 and Recon that I prefer for my riding area. If you have a BMX or even a trials background and you're looking to bring more of that riding style into your trail rides, then I cannot recommend the RSD Middle Child enough. And if you have any specific questions about that bike or how I've built mine up, you can leave those down in the comments. Speaking of questions, our next segment is where we go ahead and answer some of your viewer-submitted questions. And this week, we have 3 of them. Our first comes from YouTube user @BurningDownBabylon, and they're wondering about molding their 29-inch bike, whether it's possible and what the pros and cons are. And my short, politically correct answer would be to check with the manufacturer, but that's kind of boring. For the most part, I would say that technically, yes, you can, but it is going to have some effects on your geometry. We actually did a whole video on this where we looked at the pros and cons, and we actually did a back-to-back comparison of riding 27.5-inch wheels, 29, and a mixed wheel setup, and I'll put a link to that somewhere up here. You can check that out if you want to learn more. In terms of geometry, the biggest thing is going to be that you are going to lower your bottom bracket. And if your bike came out within the last 5 or so years, there's a good chance that it already has a pretty low bottom bracket, and going even lower could mean a lot of pedal strikes. Now, one way to mitigate this is by running some short, 160 or maybe even shorter cranks, which are thankfully getting more and more common. So something to think about there. Obviously, you'll also affect your head tube angle, seat tube angle, and your reach just a little bit as well, but those differences are not going to be quite as noticeable as that lower bottom bracket. Hopefully that was at least a little bit helpful, and if you do go ahead and choose to mullet your bike, we'd love to know what you think about it. Now, our next question comes from another YouTube user, though I'm not even going to try to pronounce their username, and they're wondering if we think that high pivot gearbox bikes are the bikes of the future. In short, no. Do I think that we will see more high pivot bikes and more gearbox bikes 5 years from now than we have on the market right now? Probably. Both of those two things offer, tangible benefits in specific aspects of riding, but they also have some major consequences. Mostly that being increased friction in the drivetrain as well as increased weight, which is why I think they'll both remain as niche, exciting options for those looking to do things a little different. Last up is a good friend of mine and someone you may have seen on this channel helping out with some of our group tests from time to time, and that is at Ethan Rides Bikes. He wants to know what bike of all the ones we reviewed has been our favorite or one of the biggest standouts. And I've got two answers. The first of which is the new 5th Gen Ibis Ripley. This bike was seriously so much fun. It had the composure of a long travel bike with the playfulness and efficiency of a short one. And out of all the bikes I've ridden, maybe ever, this was the toughest one to send back. The second bike I want to talk about, the review actually hasn't been published yet. It'll be coming out early next year, but that is the Marin Gestalt XR. This alloy gravel bike is unashamedly biased towards single track, with a 67.5 degree head tube angle and 480mm wide bars. This is by far the most aggressive gravel bike I've ever ridden. And to be honest, I was a bit skeptical going into it, but so far, I've been loving just about every part of it. There doesn't really seem to be any compromises on less technical terrain, and of course, it eats up single track like, well, a mountain bike. Thank you to everyone who submitted a question. Sorry we couldn't get to answering all of them. If you've got a question that you would like to see us answer, then you can go ahead and drop that in the comments. Hopefully, we'll fit it into next week's show. We're going to wrap up every one of these weekly Rewind videos by sharing something that got us stoked over this past week, and we hope will do the same for you. This week, we're talking about a little video that was put out by BMX legend and Fairdale Bikes owner Taj Mihelic.
My favorite part about mountain biking is being in the woods. I know it's not exactly solving the world's problems, but it helps my brain find room to put them into perspective. It just feels good to be riding through the trees. It's so grounding to be out here in the woods, and I love that my bike takes me here.
In this video, Taj is riding the Fairdale Elevator, a super fun BMX-inspired hardtail that we reviewed earlier this summer, and it should be on your screen to watch right now if you want to learn more. Before you do though, take a quick little second to help our new video series spread by hitting that like button, and as always, remember that bikes are for everyone. Have fun out there.